The wind clawed across the ridges of Ashridge, Colorado, cutting through the early spring morning with a sharp, bitter chill. Dawn had technically arrived, but the sun remained hidden behind the jagged silhouettes of pine trees that clawed at the sky. Mist crept low across the hillsides, clinging to the brittle earth and skeletal grass like a mourning shroud. Beneath that ghostly veil, a shadow moved, slow, stumbling, shaped by suffering. His name was Ruckus, a German shepherd in name only now. The proud lines of his breed were obscured by starvation, his ribs sharply etched beneath a patchy coat of dull blacks and faded tans. Clumps of fur had fallen away, revealing scars crusted with old scabs and fresh wounds alike. A thick leather collar hung crooked around his neck, the buckle rusted and the skin beneath raw from months, years of neglect. A broken chain, snapped at one end, trailed behind him like the physical memory of the prison he could never fully escape. Each step he took was a compromise with pain. His paws, cracked and bloodied, left faint marks in the frost-bitten soil. Around his left ear, a jagged scar twisted through his fur, a silent souvenir of one particularly brutal winter. His gait was uneven, a subtle limp favouring his back leg. It still ached from when a boot, wielded not in clumsiness but rage, had found its mark. Yet he walked, not with purpose but with resignation. This wasn't freedom. It was survival in slow motion. Ahead of him, sheep scattered across the frozen slope, their hooves crunching softly against the brittle ground. Ruckus herded them loosely, nudging the stragglers with a shoulder or a gentle nip, not because anyone asked him to. No whistle, no command, just an old pattern etched into him so deeply that it persisted even now, like muscle memory, long outlasting affection. One sheep, or rather a goat, trailed behind more closely than the rest. Daisy. Her coat was rough and greying, her left leg twisted slightly from some long-forgotten injury. She limped, always a step slower, yet never far from Ruckus. There was something unspoken between them, a silent recognition of wariness. She would occasionally brush her side against his, not affectionately exactly, but as if confirming he was still there. Ruckus never flinched. Hers was the only touch that didn't hurt. Beyond the pasture, perched on a slope of dying weeds and frost-hardened dirt, stood the cabin. It was more ruin than home. The wood was bleached and peeling, windows shuttered like eyes that refused to see. Smoke hadn't risen from the chimney in years, and the porch sagged in the middle as if weighed down by memory. This was where Dale Rusk lived, or rather existed. Dale was in his early 50s, built broad like an ox, but with the crumbling disposition of a man who'd poured too many years into bottles and bitterness. His jaw was square, but his lips hung slack. His eyes, a dull wash of grey, darted constantly as if forever anticipating betrayal. He rarely left the property. When he did, it was only for more liquor or bags of feed, and when he came back, he was always worse than when he left. Dale hadn't wanted Ruckus. The dog had belonged to his sister, Marion, kind, quiet, with hands that smelled like lanolin and hay. She had been the heart of the farm. Small and wiry, she moved through life as though even the smallest animal mattered. To her, Ruckus had been more than a shepherd. He'd been her companion, her shadow, her guardian. When she grew sick, cancer, cold and cruel, he had lain beside her bed every night, and when she died, he'd howled once, just once. Then fell silent, as if mourning wasn't meant to be repeated. Marion died 3 years ago. Dale inherited the land, the livestock, and the dog. But Dale didn't understand love or legacy. He didn't hit Ruckus often, but when he did, he made it hurt. What was more common was absence, no water dish, no soft bedding, no praise, just barked orders soaked in whiskey and the occasional scrap tossed with a sneer. Ruckus learned to obey, not out of loyalty, but to avoid pain. That morning was colder than most. The frost had settled like glass across the low fence posts, and the sky hovered in a pale, reluctant grey. Ruckus moved slowly, shepherding the sheep to the east pasture. Each step burned. His back leg throbbed from the last time Dale had stumbled over him and lashed out. Still, he nudged the animals forward. The sheep obeyed. The goat limped. Ruckus endured. Now and then his eyes would drift across the ridge toward a cluster of cottonwood trees, Marion's favourite place. She used to call it the Whispering Path, where the leaves rustled like secrets being passed between the trees. He remembered the smell of her boots, the way her voice rose when she laughed, the crumbs of biscuits in her coat pocket. He remembered safety. He hadn't felt that since. As they paused by a shallow stream, Ruckus sat down heavily beside a stone. His sides heaved, chest rising too fast for a dog that wasn't running. Hunger gnawed at him constantly, dull and familiar like the ache of memory. From behind, he heard the creak of the cabin door. His body stiffened. Dale stood on the porch, already drinking, though the sun had barely crested the hills. A stained flannel shirt hung off his frame, and his boots didn't match. "Move 'em to the west slope by noon," he hollered, voice slurring. "If I see one sheep out of place, I'll skin you first." Ruckus rose. He didn't react visibly, but his eyes dulled. He turned to the herd and resumed his task. The hours passed. The sun climbed, but gave no warmth. Clouds hung low, pregnant with winter's leftovers, snow or sleet or something crueler. Ruckus guided the herd in tired circles, his stomach twisted with emptiness. He hadn't eaten since yesterday, or was it the day before? By midday, Dale had passed out beside the barn, bottle still clutched in hand. Ruckus approached cautiously. A trough near the gate held half-stagnant water. He drank quickly before being noticed. As he lifted his head, he saw Daisy watching from behind the gate. Her eyes blinked slowly, chewing hay. She didn't look happy, but she didn't look broken. And that meant something. As dusk settled, Ruckus led the herd back. His body trembled with each step. His paws left faint smudges of blood on the frost-bitten earth, but he didn't falter. This was his duty, not out of loyalty, not anymore, but because no one else would. And deep inside, some quiet piece of him still held on to that whisper of a life once filled with gentle hands and soft laughter. That night, as wind rattled the boards of the barn and stars vanished behind clouds, Ruckus curled beside Daisy in the trampled straw. He didn't dream of escape. Not yet. He dreamed only of Marion, her voice, her scent, the feeling of being seen. He didn't know it yet, but something was coming, something that would change everything. Not an escape, a reckoning. A moment where someone wouldn't just see him, but choose not to look away. The next morning dawned under a sky swollen with thick, colourless clouds. The calendar called it spring, but Ashridge refused to listen. Snowflakes fell again, thin and sharp like ground glass, spinning in cruel spirals through the wind. The air bit harder than usual, and even the trees seemed to brace themselves against the chill. Inside the barn, Ruckus stirred before the first light touched the roof. His body was stiff, particularly in his hind leg, which had grown increasingly difficult to move. Every attempt to rise sent needles of pain radiating through his joints. But he did rise, because that was what was expected, because the routine demanded it. Beside him, Daisy shifted slowly, her joints crackling like dry wood. She let out a soft grunt, blinking sleep from her weary eyes. The two of them stepped into the cold together, bracing as the wind slapped them across the face. Outside, the sheep milled around the paddock in loose disarray. Dale had forgotten to secure the gate again. Most of the animals lingered near the trough, reluctant to wander far. But something was wrong. Ruckus sensed it before Daisy's low bleat confirmed it. Her cry was sharp, uncertain. The gate to the goat pen hung open, swinging in rhythm with the wind. Ruckus limped toward it, ears high. Tufts of grey fur clung to the splintered wire. Daisy's scent lingered thick on the air, recent and frantic. The broken fence on the north edge of the pasture had finally given way. Rusted wire peeled back from the post, sharp as teeth. She was gone. Ruckus didn't understand panic the way people did, but urgency flooded his chest like fire. Without hesitation, he ducked through the gap and began tracking. Snow covered most of the ground, but his nose followed what his eyes couldn't, each step a message, each broken twig a signal. His limbs protested, but he pressed forward, nose low, tail stiff, his breath fogging in bursts as he moved deeper into the trees. Behind him, the porch door slammed. Dale's voice, hoarse and enraged, cracked through the wind. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Ruckus stopped mid-stride, instinct forcing his body to shrink. He turned slowly. Dale was coming down the steps in a white undershirt, patched denim, and boots that weren't even tied. His eyes were sunk deep, rimmed in red. In his hands swung a metal chain, long and thick, the kind used to tow equipment, or to punish. "The damn goat's gone," Dale snarled, spitting the words, "and you let it happen." He closed the distance in 3 wide, furious steps. Ruckus didn't move. He'd learned not to run, that only made it worse. The first strike landed on his shoulder. The chain whipped across his fur with a wet snap, drawing a yelp of pain and shock. The second hit came across his back, forcing him to his knees. Dale's curses blended into meaningless noise, just breath and venom and whiskey-soaked rage. Useless mutt. Lazy damn beast. Ruckus staggered backward, ears pinned, vision swimming. He didn't fight. He never had. Marion's voice, once the sound of calm, was buried deep beneath years of silence. He only endured. But then Daisy's cry echoed again, high, far, and terrified. From somewhere down the ridge, her voice reached through the snow and through Dale's rage. For a second, even Dale paused. He turned his head toward the sound, then back to Ruckus, face contorted in contempt. "No food for you today," he muttered. "That'll teach you what's what." He turned and stalked off, the chain dragging behind him, scraping the ground in a trail of rust and blood. Ruckus stayed where he had fallen, breathing shallowly. His shoulder throbbed. His front paw twitched from nerve pain. The snow fell thicker now, collecting on his back like ash. It should have broken him. It almost did. But after several long minutes, something deeper than instinct stirred inside him. Slowly, painfully, he stood. His legs shook. His breath came in short bursts. But he faced the trees again, his ears turning toward the sound of Daisy's last call. She was out there, and Marion, if she were here, she would have told him to go. So he did. The woods beyond the pasture were quiet, save for the creak of bending branches and the whisper of snow brushing against bark. The world was hushed, as if waiting. Ruckus followed Daisy's trail with slow determination, the way he had once tracked coyotes under Marion's command. Each step hurt, but he moved anyway. His blood left faint red dots in the snow. Still he pressed on. He found her at the bottom of a shallow gully beneath a hollowed tree. One leg caught awkwardly on the slick incline. She bled softly when she saw him, her breath fast and frightened. Ruckus didn't bark. He didn't whine. He stepped down into the gully and nudged her gently, then braced his body beside hers and pushed. It took time. It hurt. But together they climbed. When she finally made it out, scrambling up with all four hooves shaking, Ruckus followed. He slipped once, caught himself, and stood by her side. Snow continued to fall as they stood at the edge of the clearing, a breath steaming in the cold air. Ruckus didn't pause. He turned, nudging her forward again, and began the slow journey home. Step by painful step, they returned through the trees, past the broken fence, into the paddock. Dale was nowhere in sight. The barn stood quiet and dark. Ruckus guided Daisy through the gate, then collapsed just beside the barn wall. His body trembled. The straw beneath him felt warmer than it had any night before. As he lay there, chest rising and falling in slow, shallow motions, something stirred in the valley below. The town of Ashridge gleamed faintly through the mist, distant and untouched. Ruckus had never been there, never crossed that ridge, but something in him whispered that the life he'd known wouldn't last forever. Maybe, just maybe, pain didn't have to be the only inheritance. In the barn, the cold pressed in. The wind howled outside like a mournful song. But Ruckus did not shiver. Not this time. He had done what no one asked him to do, because it mattered. Because someone had once taught him to care. And because even broken creatures remember how to love. The shed stank of mildew and metal. Rusted nails jutted from the warped pine walls, and the only light came through a cracked window where vines clawed at the glass from the outside. Inside, the air was thick with rot, with liquor, and with the sharp, metallic scent of fear. Ruckus lay curled against the cold dirt floor, his body trembling in shallow waves. A welt stretched across his ribs where the rope had landed again and again. The pain wasn't new. It was the kind he no longer cried out for. He had stopped yelping after the second strike. That was when his mind retreated into silence, into a place where pain was just another shadow on the wall. Dale stood above him, panting, eyes glassy with rage and drink. The frayed rope hung limply in his hand, his grip loosening as he muttered to himself, slurred curses and incoherent fury, his breath reeking of grain alcohol. The beating hadn't been about the goat, not really. It never was. It was about everything Dale couldn't control. Everything he had lost, and the one living thing too weak to stop him. Outside, the wind gusted down the ridge, rattling the tin walls with hollow clatter. Then came a new sound, low, mechanical, distant. A hum that grew louder, steadier, until it was unmistakable. Tires crunched against gravel. A diesel engine idled just beyond the fence. Dale didn't notice it at first. He raised his arm again, rope poised to strike once more, when a voice cut through the shed like a blade. "Hello?" It was calm, commanding. Dale paused, squinting toward the window. "Anyone home?" The voice was followed by footsteps, heavy, deliberate. The kind that carried authority without asking for permission. Around the corner stepped a man in uniform. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow, revealing arms carved by time and purpose. Salt and pepper hair clung close to his scalp, and his eyes, the colour of slate, scanned the scene with a soldier's calculation. Sergeant M. Delaney, Mac, had served 20 years in the Marine Corps. 3 tours, most of them alongside combat dogs. He'd trained them, fought beside them, and buried too many. After retirement, he'd drifted west, volunteering at veteran outreach centres and rescue shelters tucked away in the Colorado mountains. This morning he had taken the scenic route home from a training exercise. He hadn't planned to stop. But he had heard something, first a sharp yelp, then a sickening thud. It was the sound of a life being crushed under rage. Mac stepped around the corner of the shed and saw the man mid-swing and the dog cowering beneath him. "Hey!" Mac's voice cracked like a rifle shot. "Put it down." Dale turned, stunned, his arm freezing mid-air. His eyes were bloodshot, his face flushed and streaked with sweat. "Who the hell are you?" he slurred. Mac didn't blink. "Sergeant Delaney, U.S. Marine Corps," he said, stepping forward. "And what I see looks a hell of a lot like abuse." Dale squared his shoulders. "Ain't your business. My land. My dog." But Mac wasn't listening. His eyes had already locked on Ruckus, bleeding, trembling, covered in scars and dust. A dog who had once stood tall and proud, now reduced to flinching silence. Mac had seen dogs like this before, after IED blasts, after firefights, after the kind of betrayal that only humans could deliver. Inside the shed, Ruckus lifted his head slowly, his gaze meeting Mac's. In that moment, something passed between them. Not words, not even recognition. Something deeper. Mac didn't see a stray. He saw a soldier left behind. "You'll hand him over now," Mac said, his voice low but sharp, "or I call every lawman in 5 counties. Dale hesitated, his jaw working. Then he spat on the ground. "Take him. Worthless damn thing anyway." Mac didn't move until Dale turned and staggered away, bottle back in hand, muttering to himself. Only then did the Marine step forward and gently open the shed door. "Easy now," he murmured, crouching low. "I'm not here to hurt you." Ruckus didn't move at first. He stared, unsure, his body locked tight with mistrust. But then, slowly, painfully, he began to crawl forward. Not walk, crawl. Until his muzzle touched Mac's outstretched hand. The world seemed to hold its breath. Snow had begun to fall again, drifting in quiet spirals outside. Inside the shed, time slowed. Mac reached out and touched the dog's shoulder. "That's it, soldier," he said quietly. "Let's get you out of here." He slipped an arm beneath Ruckus's chest, lifting gently. The dog didn't resist. He was too tired to fight, but there was something else too, a thread of recognition, of trust buried deep. Just as Mac began to rise, the door behind him slammed open. Dale. His face was red with fury, the chain clutched in one hand like a snake ready to strike again. "You don't get to take him," he shouted. "That's my dog, my damn property." Mac didn't flinch. He positioned himself between Ruckus and Dale, still holding the trembling dog. "That dog is bleeding," he said evenly. "Starved, covered in welts. You want to explain that to a deputy?" Dale's eyes burned. "You think you're some kind of hero?" he spat. "Think you can just flash some army badge and fix what ain't yours?" "No, sir," Mac said. "Not anymore." The wind rattled the broken window. Ruckus stood now, legs unsteady but locked. He didn't cower. Not this time. Mac's hand moved to his hip, not for a weapon but for his phone. He began to dial. Dale's jaw tightened. "You calling cops on me?" he snarled. "You think I ain't got friends?" "You're welcome to find out." Dale's face twisted with rage. He lunged. Mac had expected it. Years of training had sharpened his reflexes, not dulled them. As Dale swung the chain, Mac stepped aside and caught his wrist mid-air. In a single motion, he twisted, not to break, but to disarm. The chain fell to the ground with a clatter. Dale stumbled forward, off balance. Mac used his momentum to guide him into the shed wall. "I don't want to hurt you," Mac said through gritted teeth, pinning Dale with one knee. "But I will stop you." Dale growled, breath heavy. "You don't get it. That dog's all I had left. I didn't ask for any of this. You think this land feeds itself? Mac eased the pressure slightly but didn't let go. Then you should have treated him like the only good thing you had left. From the road came the warble of a siren. Brief and sharp, it grew louder. A minute later, gravel crunched outside. A door slammed. Then a voice rang out, calm but firm. "This is Deputy Travis Langley, Pine County Sheriff's Department. Step out slowly with your hands where I can see them." Mac stood and released Dale, who staggered upright, muttering threats. But Mac didn't look at him. He turned to Ruckus, placing a gentle hand on the dog's battered side. "You're safe now, buddy," he whispered, and step by step they walked out of the shed, together. The road to Ashridge Veterinary Clinic wound through the outskirts of town like a ribbon of frost, flanked by shuttered stores and sagging fences half swallowed by snow. The red door of the clinic stood ajar under the soft glow of a porch light, casting a warm halo through the flurry of falling flakes. Mac pulled up beside it, his Humvee engine rumbling low as he glanced at the curled figure in his back seat. Ruckus hadn't moved much. He lay awkwardly, wrapped in Rita's thick wool blanket, his ribs rising and falling in uneven rhythm, his amber eyes dull but open, always watching. Mac stepped out, the cold biting his face. He opened the rear door and carefully lifted Ruckus into his arms. The dog stiffened slightly but didn't resist, too weak, too confused, and perhaps somewhere beneath the fear, already sensing that this touch was different. It wasn't rough, it wasn't cruel, it was steady. Inside the clinic, the air was warm and smelled faintly of antiseptic and chamomile tea. Photos of rescued animals lined the walls, their owners' handwritten thank you notes pinned beneath each frame. A small radio played soft, classical music from the reception desk. As the door opened, a woman in a lab coat emerged from a back room. Dr. Nora Whitaker was in her early 60s, wiry and alert, with steel-grey curls pinned into a loose bun and a face lined by years of compassion and hard decisions. Her cardigan sleeves were pushed to the elbows beneath her coat, one stained with iodine. The moment her eyes landed on Ruckus, her expression shifted, tight with concern. "Oh no," she murmured, stepping aside. "Bring him in. Set him down on the table." Mac moved through the room quickly but carefully, laying Ruckus atop a thick fleece pad on the stainless steel exam table. The dog's body trembled once as cold metal met his belly, but he didn't flinch further. Nora was already gloving up, her hands brisk and gentle. "What happened?" she asked, her voice calm but urgent. "Beating," Mac said. "Starvation. Long-term neglect. Found him on a property near Ridgeway Hollow. Owner's name was Dale Rusk." Nora paused, eyes narrowing. "Dale Rusk. Figures. That man couldn't keep a cactus alive." She resumed her exam, stethoscope pressed to Ruckus's chest. Heart's fast but steady, breathing shallow. He's dehydrated and anemic. Her fingers ran over the dog's frame, inspecting bruises, welts, old injuries healed badly. "These scars, they've been here a while. Except this one." She pointed to the fresh welt across his ribs. "That's new." Mac stood silently, hovering just near Ruckus's paw, unsure whether his presence soothed or startled. "I'll need to keep him for at least 48 hours, Nora said, already gathering supplies. "IV fluids, antibiotics, mild sedative. We'll clean him up, shave around the wounds, see how his legs respond after rest." "Can I stay?" Mac asked. Nora glanced up, surprised. "You can, but most folks don't. There's a cot in the back if you're serious." "I'm not mystified." She studied him for a moment, then gave a short nod. "Blankets in the closet, tea in the kettle. Make yourself invisible." Mac settled into a spot against the wall, close but not intrusive, as Nora began the slow, precise process of tending to Ruckus's injuries. Hours passed. She worked in silence, hands moving with practiced tenderness, even when the dog whimpered under sedation. Mac stayed awake, never leaving Ruckus's side. The dog's ears twitched when Mac adjusted in his seat. He didn't relax, not fully, but he didn't retreat either. That was enough. Near midnight, Nora handed Mac a mug of chamomile tea. "He's not out of the woods," she said quietly. "But I've seen worse recover. He's got spirit. I'll give him that." "So do you," Mac murmured. She shrugged. "You do what you can. That's the job." Then the door opened again, ushering in a gust of cold air and a tall silhouette in a brown sheriff's coat. Sheriff Ben Holloway stepped inside, mid-50s, with skin like cured leather and a thick mustache untouched by fashion since 1992. His boots clicked softly against the tile. "Evening, Nora Mac," he greeted. So Nora didn't look up. "Heard Dale's got some charges coming his way." "More than a few," Ben replied. "He's processed, locked up overnight. We'll see what sticks." The sheriff approached the exam table and looked down at Ruckus. His stern face softened. "Damn, poor fella's seen hell." "He survived it," Mac said quietly. "You planning to keep him?" Ben asked. "Don't know yet, but I'm not handing him back." "No one's asking you to," Ben said. "I filed for temporary protective custody. Animal Services will want a full report, but after what I saw today, I'll vouch for your judgment." Mac nodded his appreciation. Ben lingered a moment, then stepped back. "I'll check in tomorrow. Holler if you need anything. I've got a soft spot for dogs. Don't tell my deputies." He left with a quiet chuckle, closing the door behind him. The night stretched long. Nora continued working, cleaning wounds, monitoring vitals. Ruckus stirred occasionally, flinching in his sleep. Mac never left his post on the floor, his legs stretched in front of him, back against the cabinet, watching over the dog as if standing watch on foreign soil. He hadn't done this since Emily died. Since cancer stole her from their home in North Carolina, leaving behind a silence that clung like dust. After her, Mac had sealed away the soft parts of himself. But now, here in a veterinary clinic tucked between mountains and memory, something in him began to thaw. Around 3 a.m, Ruckus's breathing deepened, his muscles loosened, and when Mac reached out and placed his hand near the edge of the table, Ruckus shifted just enough to press a fraction of his weight against it. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was something close. The sun had not yet risen when Mac stood outside the clinic, breath fogging the morning air. Across the way stood Pine Creek Animal Rescue, a modest structure bordered by chain-link fence, wind chimes, and prayer flags fluttering in the breeze. Mac looked down into the jeep where Ruckus lay on a folded blanket, his eyes alert now, no longer glazed with fear, just caution. "Just for a little while," Mac whispered. "I'll be back before the sun hits the pines." The door to the rescue opened before he could knock. Wendy Lawn stepped out onto the porch, clipboard in one hand, fleece hoodie zipped to her chin. She was tall, broad-shouldered, with braided red hair peppered with grey. Her voice was raspy, weathered by years of shouting over barking dogs. "You must be Mac," she said, extending a hand. "Ben told me you were coming, said this one's special." Mac nodded. "His name's Ruckus, former working dog, abused by his last owner, doesn't eat much, doesn't sleep well, doesn't trust." Wendy crouched to Ruckus's level, her expression gentle but grounded. "Hey there, big guy," she said softly. "You're safe now. No one here expects anything from you except time." Inside, the rescue was quiet. Cages lined the halls, some empty, others holding dogs that barked or whined in greeting. Ruckus didn't react. He kept his eyes forward, wary but observant, moving with the slow precision of someone who had learned the world could be cruel. Wendy led them to a side room, dimly lit, soft music playing from a speaker, hay-lined floors and a padded kennel tucked into the corner. A clean bowl of water sat beside it. The food dish remained empty. "We'll start slow," she said. "Chicken broth, maybe some rice. That tail looks like it hasn't wagged in years." Mac nodded. "I'll be back this afternoon." Wendy gave him a long look. "Every day?" "Until he knows I won't disappear." She smiled faintly. "Then you're already ahead of most." That afternoon Mac returned with a folding chair and a worn copy of Call of the Wild. He sat beside the kennel, reading softly, letting his voice fill the space like distant thunder. Ruckus didn't move, but his ears tilted just slightly toward the sound. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. The mornings came softer now. The snow had melted from the roads, and the sharp edge of winter gave way to a gentler chill that smelled faintly of thawing pine. A month had passed since Mac had carried Ruckus out of that broken shed, and in that time the quiet rhythm between them had deepened. At Pine Creek, the dog had begun to change, subtly but unmistakably. Each morning and evening Mac arrived. Some days he read aloud, other days he simply sat, legs crossed outside the kennel, a tin of coffee in his hand and a book unopened in his lap. He spoke to Ruckus as though they were old friends, stories of Camp Leatherneck, of a dog named Taz who once sniffed out explosives under Afghan sun, of Emily and how she taught him to wrap Christmas presents without tape. And through it all, Ruckus listened. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. But his eyes stayed on Mac, and some days he leaned just barely into the man's knee. Wendy and the volunteers took note. Marco, the youngest of them, whispered one afternoon, "It's like he exhales a little every time Mac walks in." Even the staff log had changed. One night Wendy scribbled, "First sign of voluntary engagement, possibly bonded." Mac knew what that meant. He had seen it before, with working dogs who had lost everything but remembered, against all odds, how to choose someone again. And so, on a grey Thursday morning, he stood in the Pine Creek staff office with a manila folder in hand. "I'm doing it," he said. Wendy looked up from her desk, adjusting her glasses. "Adoption papers?" "Yeah." Her lips curled into a smile. "A real one? Not just polite?" "About time," he said, voice rough. She slid the folder toward her, signed where needed, and picked up the phone to start the formal calls. "There's just one more step," she reminded him. "Home evaluation, you know how it works." That afternoon, Mac returned home to his log cabin tucked just north of Ashridge, nestled among 3 acres of pine and cottonwood. It wasn't fancy, just neat and solid, with a fenced garden and a detached workshop he used for woodworking. A gravel ring marked the training circle where he used to work with retired military dogs. He brushed sawdust off the porch steps and straightened the food bowls by the front door. The larger one was already engraved with a name, Ruckus. A white SUV from the county pulled into his drive just past 4 o'clock. A woman stepped out, tall and composed, her copper-brown hair twisted neatly at her collar. She wore a navy jacket, khaki trousers and boots that were more practical than pretty. Her face held a quiet compassion sharpened by experience. "Sergeant Delaney?" she asked, extending a hand. "Claire Jennings. I'm here for the final adoption evaluation." Mac shook her hand. "Yes, ma'am. He's more than ready." She moved through the property with efficient grace, clipboard in hand. She noted the clean feeding stations, the secured fencing, and the small heated outbuilding Mac had converted into a dog retreat. But it wasn't until they stepped inside that her expression softened. The living room smelled faintly of firewood. Near the hearth was an orthopedic dog bed surrounded by a plush blanket and a rubber chew toy, tag still on. The engraved food bowl stood beside a full water dish. On the mantel above the fireplace sat a single photograph, Mac in uniform smiling beside a German shepherd. "Taz, you've done this before," Claire observed. Mac nodded once. "My last partner didn't make it home. This one deserves more than just surviving." Claire scribbled something into her notes. "I think Ruckus is lucky to have you. I'll expedite the approval." 3 days later the call came. The court had reviewed the paperwork, the evaluation passed without objection, and the county released the official notice. Ruckus was no longer state property. He was family. That evening, Mac drove back to Pine Creek with a heart that felt heavier than it should have. At the gate, Wendy was waiting, a leash in hand. "He's ready," she said softly, "but I think you know, you're not rescuing him anymore. You're choosing each other." Mac crouched beside the kennel. Ruckus was standing now, ears forward, body still lean but steady. He looked at Mac, not with fear but with awareness. "You ready to go home, buddy?" Mac asked. Ruckus didn't move at first. Then, slowly, he stepped forward. The drive back to the cabin was quiet. Ruckus sat upright in the back seat, head near the window, nostrils flaring as pine and cold wind filtered through the cracked glass. When they arrived, Mac opened the door and Ruckus leapt down with care, landing softly on the gravel. He trotted to the porch steps and paused, glancing back. 2 bowls waited there. One said water, the other said Ruckus. "Go ahead," Mac said gently. The dog stepped through the open door. Inside he moved room to room, nose low, cautious but not afraid. When he reached the living room and saw the bed near the fire, he curled into it slowly, one paw folding over the other. He didn't sleep, just lay still, eyes half-lidded, watching Mac move through the house. Dinner was warm chicken and rice drizzled with broth. Ruckus ate slowly, deliberately, every bite measured. Afterward he drank from his bowl, then returned to the hearth and lay down again. Mac sat in his recliner, book in hand, the same one he had read at Pine Creek, Old Yeller. He picked up where he left off, reading softly. The dog didn't react much, but his ears flicked once. Later that night, as the wind sighed outside and the fire crackled low, Ruckus rose, padded across the rug and placed his head on Mac's boot. Mac looked down. His smile was small but deep. "You're home, boy," he whispered. No loud fanfare, no grand declaration, just that quiet gesture, just a broken dog who had once known nothing but pain, choosing on his own to rest against the boot of a man who had refused to look away. Outside, the sky hung heavy with stars, and the wind rustled the trees like an old hymn. And inside, beneath the orange glow of firelight, peace took root in a place that had once known only silence. Late afternoon light spilled over the hills in golden beams, bathing the Colorado landscape in a quiet warmth that hinted at summer. The snow was long gone, replaced by soft mud trails and sprouting green. Wildflowers dotted the hillsides, timid bursts of colour among the browned grass. Mac stood at the edge of a field just off the old road, one hand resting gently on Ruckus's back. The German shepherd stood still beside him, his eyes fixed forward, his breath calm. It had been more than a month since Mac had carried him out of the shed. Now they had returned, not to stay, but to say goodbye. The land looked different now. The sheep pen was crumpled, half swallowed by weeds and thistles. The water trough lay on its side, rusted through and caked in mud. The barn's door creaked lazily in the wind, barely clinging to a single hinge. The windows of the house were broken, the roof sagging under its own weight. Ivy clawed through the cracked siding like nature reclaiming what cruelty had abandoned. Ruckus walked without hesitation. His gait, once broken and tentative, now held the careful poise of strength. He wore a soft harness Mac had ordered online, embroidered with his name and a small patch that read, "Family, not forgotten." His coat, once patchy and dull, gleamed under the sun. The pale scars still showed beneath the fur, but his ribs no longer protruded. His steps no longer trembled. They passed the threshold of the gate where Ruckus had stood night after night in the cold, hungry and silent, waiting for orders or scraps. He sniffed the ground briefly, then moved on. No pause, no lingering. He was not that dog anymore. Mac didn't speak. Some places didn't require words. They reached the house, or what was left of it. A mould-stained armchair was toppled near the fireplace inside, and what remained of the kitchen was buried under dust and broken glass. Mac stepped to the doorway, but didn't enter. He looked down at Ruckus, who had stopped just short of the porch. The dog raised his head slightly, gazed toward the spot where Dale had once stood shouting, chain in hand. But there was no fear in his eyes now. Just a blink. Then he turned and walked away. They followed a narrow trail veiled in shade, winding through old chestnut trees and patches of wild mint. The air grew cooler there, still and reverent. At the end of the trail stood a simple stone marker tucked into the mossy slope of a hill. It was small, nearly hidden by grass, but the words carved into it remained clear. Marion Walters, 1945 to 2021. She loved what couldn't speak. Mac knelt beside the grave and placed a bouquet of wildflowers, Colleen yarrow, blue aster, and one sprig of lavender, gathered from his own yard that morning. Ruckus sat next to him, then slowly lowered his chest to the moss, legs folded beneath him. He didn't move, he didn't whimper. He simply lay there in silence, eyes half-lidded, as if listening to something deeper than wind. Minutes passed. Mac finally broke the stillness. "You were right about him," he whispered. "He's still got fight in him, but it's quiet now, the good kind." He placed one hand on Ruckus's shoulder, fingers brushing the patch of fur that had grown back over a scar. "You kept him alive, Marion. He remembers." Ruckus didn't stir, but his tail twitched once in the grass. When they stood to leave, neither of them looked back. The trail opened again into the clearing, sunlight dappling through the branches. As they reached the edge of the hill, a sharp cry cut through the sky. Both turned upward in unison. A red-tailed hawk circled high above, its wings wide and gleaming in the light. It hovered for a moment, then banked west, soaring toward the horizon where the sky dipped into the curve of the mountains. Mac followed its path until it disappeared beyond the ridge. "Let's go home," he murmured. The drive back to Ashridge was peaceful. The truck hummed steadily along the winding back roads, tall pine trees blurring past in streaks of green. Ruckus sat upright in the passenger seat, head turned toward the window. He wasn't panting or restless, just alert. He watched the world pass by without flinching, the stiffness in his spine replaced by calm. Every so often he flicked his ears at passing sounds, at birdsong, at the faint rustle of wind in high branches. but he stayed still. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun had dipped low behind the ridge. The sky glowed with soft bands of orange, pink and violet. Mac pulled into the gravel drive, tyres crunching softly beneath them. He stepped out and opened the passenger door. Ruckus jumped down smoothly, landing with practiced care. He didn't wait to be called. He trotted ahead toward the front steps, then paused at the top, turning to glance back as if confirming Mac was close behind. Inside, the fire was already crackling. Mac had lit it before they left, knowing the temperature would drop fast after dusk. The warmth wrapped around them as they entered, cosy and familiar. On the kitchen windowsill sat a smooth stone mortar, the only thing Mac had taken from the old farm. Marian's mortar. It rested beside a potted basil plant, a keepsake now, a quiet reminder of where the story began. Dinner was simple: grilled venison, brown rice, and peas. Mac set the bowl near the hearth. Ruckus approached without hesitation. He ate slowly, deliberately, savouring each bite, pausing only to drink from his water bowl before circling his bed twice and curling into the fleece with a soft exhale. Mac settled into his recliner and picked up the book he'd been reading aloud every night, Old Yeller. He opened to the same chapter as before and began to read, his voice steady, the cadence soothing. As the fire cracked, Ruckus stirred. He stood, walked the few steps to Mac's chair, and placed his head on the Marine's boot. Mac looked down, smiling. Not wide, just enough. You're home, boy. Outside, the wind moved gently across the hills, brushing through the pines like an old song. The night held no ghosts now, no echoes of chains, just the silence of peace, the soft breathing of a dog finally at rest, and the warmth of a home built not from walls, but from choice. Because sometimes healing doesn't arrive like thunder. It comes softly, in a paw resting against your hand, in a tail that finally flicks, in the slow blink of eyes that have seen too much but still dare to hope. Ruckus never spoke a word. He didn't need to. His life said everything.